What are some declassified government documents that are surprisingly terrifying? This isn't really a classified document, but at one point the US government was telling people to build your own bomb shelter to protect your family. And it showed how to dig a 8-foot by 4-foot by 10-foot hole in your backyard, and if there is a nuclear threat to get your family and go in there and cover it with a door. So obviously that wouldn't really protect anyone in the case of a nuclear attack. Later it came out that the purpose of telling families to do that was so if there was a nuclear attack on American soil, they wouldn't have to bury as many bodies because the families dug their own grave. So yeah, not classified but along the same disturbing stuff the US government did. I have a copy of this pamphlet. A lot of the designs seemed really stupid. The door with two kiddie pools filled with sand in it, one in particular, though in its defense, that one was supposed to be in your basement. Devilized the plan after 9/11 to make figurines that look like Osama bin Laden and give them to kids in South Asia. After it's left in the sun for a certain amount of time, its face would peel off to reveal a demon-like visage with red skin, green eyes, and black markings. Basically a demon. The objective was to scare kids and their parents, so bin Laden and Al-Qaeda would lose support. You should watch The Holy Mountain. In it they talk about knowing they will have to go to war with a country in 15 years. They make comic books and toys with a villain that looks like that other race. They also make Ipecac type medicine the same color as the skin of that race. All sorts of things to prepare kids to hate a particular races by the time they are of military age and the war is fought. That's one of the weirdest and surreal films I've seen. The bit when two people are making out in the back of a car and it cuts to a goldfish out of water struggling to breathe made me laugh every time. When the Space Shuttle Challenger was destroyed, it was reported that all 7 astronauts were killed instantly. It was revealed decades later that some, if not all of the astronauts survived the initial explosion, as the cockpit cabin had enough protection to not be breached. For 2 minutes and 45 seconds, they were awake and aware as they plummeted toward the Atlantic Ocean. Understandably, NASA knew that the news of their terrifying death would have crippled the space program even more than it already was. We looked at this in flight school and pretty much, there's evidence to support that the crew was still running their procedures, even after it was obvious shit hit the fan. They didn't die accepting their fate, they died astronauts. That's something to be admired. The same happened with Columbia. The crew were working the systems to try to troubleshoot and recover even as the space shuttle was burning up and breaking apart around them. The crew cabin was the last piece to break apart. There are over 50 mishaps with nuclear weapons by the US Air Force in the 1950s alone. Lol, we had a plane arrive in Barksdale carrying a live nuke and nobody knew how it got on the plane. Oh, Air Force. Oh, I remember when that happened. Not long after I joined. It wasn't just one nuke, but 6 of them. The Air Force literally was missing 6 nukes and had no idea. Not long after that they accidentally shipped ICBM parts to Taiwan. My previous answer to another post, https://www.theblackvault.com/not sure if this has been mentioned or not. I'm not scrolling through a million replies. The site is run by a guy named John Greenwald, u/Blackvault, started putting in FOIA requests when he was 15 and never stopped. Currently has what is arguably the largest privately owned collection of declassified information from the US government anywhere, and the entire archive is accessible for free. Not a direct answer to your question, but anything you want to know about stuff the US government was up to can be found buried in there, and he's taken the time to sort some of the more interesting stuff out to make browsing easier. Cheers. His Black Vault podcast is always a good listen, even if you don't buy into the UFO stuff. He doesn't hesitate to point out the bullshit from anyone, whether they are believers in this stuff or not, and gives a lot of time to skeptics to put their side of the argument, and treats everyone with respect. Operation Midnight Climax. The government hired sex workers to dose Johns with LSD for research purposes, so to speak. https://endpoint.wiki/operation_midnight_climax. Threat level midnight. Here's one from the Brits and the Aussies in the 50s. Nuclear tests in Maralinga. Oh yeah. Some aboriginals lived nearby. https://australianmap.net/Montbello Island/. The government were going to nuke Scotland for a while, I think. Then they realized that was a stupid idea, as Scotland is a pretty small place relatively speaking, and nuked Australia instead. I'm kind of surprised they didn't do as the Americans and nuke a territory in the Pacific. The Pitcairn Islands are still British, and they didn't care about protecting endangered species then. Australia was independent in the '50s. I can't imagine the High Commissioner asking if we could nuke part of Australia. Boeing X-37B unmanned space shuttle. It just spent 720 days in space doing God knows what. Testing stuff. And maybe taking pictures like the one Trump tweeted of the Iranian space launch site. Edit. Apparently the USAF has disclosed that it's testing a heat pipe assembly, but I'm sure there's other stuff we're not allowed to know about. The Trump tweet was from the last war version of the KH-11 spy satellites. Scott Manley on YouTube has a solid video breaking it down. In East Germany, a committed freedom fighter and her husband had dealt with having her home raided while she was away, being arrested on the way to protests and all sorts of state-sponsored harassment. After the wall fell, she was able to read the documents the Stasi had kept on her and found out her own husband was an undercover agent and had written many reports on her activities with a bloodless banality. British Metropolitan Police Services have done exactly the same on ecological protesters from organizations like Greenpeace. There was literally a case a few years back, like 5 years ago, an undercover cop I believe married and even had kids with a protester he was investigating the whole way through. Operation Northwoods, a plan for a false flag operation that came from the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Department of Defense in 1962 and given to JFK, who turned it down. The plan called for the CIA to commit terrorist actions against US civilians across the United States and frame Cuba, allowing us the right to invade and depose Castro and the communist government there. It was declassified and can be found online at the JFK Library. Terrifying that no one knows or seems to care that this was suggested by our government to the president. My high school English teacher mandated that I read this. I didn't understand it at the time, but he was responding to my question I posed him. As an airborne vet, why do you seem so jaded in regards to US history and politics? Still one of my favorite teachers to this day. He and I were able to go into all other ost things the US has done. CIA invested millions in trying to make cat spies. $20 million to be precise. I don't know, the way my friend's cat is staring at me right now, maybe they succeeded. Don't worry, they were only able to successfully make one working spy cat, and it got run over by a truck shortly after deployment. The project was called Acoustic Kitty. Project Sunshine, where the US government bought remains of dead infants to test for radiation. When they took limbs from them, the parents were never told. One mother wasn't allowed to dress her daughter for her funeral because doctors had removed her legs and didn't want her to find out. Is anyone else ridiculously disturbed that they named that Project Sunshine? What the fuck? The German radar guidance system Wotan was a great example on why your project/operation names should have nothing to do with their content. When they performed a lobotomy on Rosemary Kennedy, due to her being intellectually disabled. At 23 years of age, her father arranged a prefrontal lobotomy. At the time the procedure had only been done about 100 times in US. It failed, leaving her unable to speak intelligibly and incapacitated. She was conscious during the operation. They say that the neurosurgeons, or whatever they're called, ask the patient to count from 10 to know when they should stop cutting down. I've heard that they stopped when her speech was incoherent. Saddest thing is that she had to endure it for 64 years. All that because her family couldn't risk any political embarrassment. I noticed this is more disturbing than terrifying. but I think it fits. And she was intellectually disabled because a nurse bungled her birth. She was oxygen deprived because the nurse wouldn't let her come out of the birth canal without a male doctor present. At least the one good thing that came of it was that they set up the Special Olympics in her honor. I remember something about a heart attack gun I read some time ago. Basically a poison gun that once shot is untraceable in the victim's body and leaves no mark on their body. SRY. If it sounds RLY vague. Summary. A poison dart gun that is almost impossible to feel when it hits you. Upon entering your body it injects you with a poison that causes you to have a heart attack and disintegrates, leaving behind only a small red dot, causing autopsy to determine that you had a heart attack of natural causes, which makes it a perfect assassination weapon. I don't think it's classified, but Project Thor, using a satellite bomber to bomb a city. Imagine a missile or a bomb coming from space, and before you know it, your city is destroyed by a falling missile/bomb. It was called Rods from God. Basically it would have used kinetic energy, no explosives. It would have used a series of 2,000 pounds tungsten rods to destroy and vaporize without the radiation of a nuclear bomb. It was only avoided because we signed treaties with the Russians not to weaponize space. Well, rods from God are actually the one loophole around space weapons, and the treaties prohibit, I believe, biological, nuclear and explosive ordnance. However, kinetic weapons were never mentioned. Can't remember the source, but apparently there is a legit order signed by Hitler to his nuclear researchers saying, if they have a viable nuclear explosive, start loading into V2s immediately. However, Germans didn't come that close to making a nuclear bomb. They didn't consider it a priority because they calculated that it wouldn't be a decisive weapon to win the war, especially against US, who would already have nuclear bombs in their arsenal. Estimates put the probable year for a German nuke, if the efforts continued, around 1947. Fun fact, the Nuclear Research Institute in Berlin was one of the main objectives of the Red Army during the Battle of Berlin. Stalin really wanted to get there before the Americans. As a part of the Army and CIA's experiments into mind control, they put electrodes into the pleasure centers of dogs' brains. Initially, they wanted hundreds of dogs. They only actually got 10, and of those only a few were implanted. The ones which would be remote controlled by zapping them and essentially giving them a dose of dopamine when they were facing the right direction. The controllers would stop the dope zap when they wanted the dogs to stop, and then the dogs would reorient themselves until they were facing the correct direction. This meant when the controllers weren't present, the dogs who had been implanted would continually spin in circles, even in their cages, always looking for the direction that gave them that next hit. The program ran out of funding in the mid-60s, and the dogs were destroyed. If you want to read all about it, and other things that the US and governments around the world are up to from the horse's mouth, I highly recommend theblackvault.com, the website of /u/blackvault. Here's 100-ish pages of what I described above, helpfully foiled and archived thanks to his hard work. https documents2.theblackvault.com/document/tick/@04673555.pdf. Edit for some bright side. Via the same source we get remote control of war dogs, remotely controlled scout dog, June 1974, wherein we learn that we can just train dogs. They respond to audio and visual cues and can be trained to turn on command at long distances by playing a tone over the radio. https documents2.theblackvault.com/documents/tick/785508.pdf. Not military but psychology. Similar story. Some psychologist wanted to see the impact of mothers and socialization during early childhood. So he took newborn monkeys and put them in sensory deprivation pits where they never had any contact with anything. They spent months there becoming unresponsive and huddling in a corner. They went insane and grew up totally messed up. When introduced to regular monkeys they would freak out, and when females were inseminated and gave birth they would casually eat fingers of their babies or smash them around or dismember them. Google Pit of Despair experiment. This is a rabbit hole of a case, only partially classified by the CIA, until information was released 3 years after initial capture. Robert Levinson, former FBI agent, retired and began working as a private investigator, specializing in Russian crime circles. Levinson traveled to the Persian Gulf's Kish Island, which had fewer restrictions on American passports due to being a free trade zone, to enter Iran. He was last seen March 9, 2007. For 3 years after his disappearance, the US government was adamant that he was not acting with a government party, only private by work. After 3 years, it was confirmed that Levinson was acting as part of the CIA on an unauthorized mission to gather data on an Iranian regime. He has had a proof of life appearance in 2010. Levinson has 7 kids, one of which with his mom, that have traveled to Iran find their dad and husband, only to be shown plain manifestos by Iranian officials, suggesting that Levinson had left. As of 2013, if he's still alive, Levinson is the longest held American captive at 12 years. The FBI poster. Wiki article. US Senate calls for release of hostages in Iran in 2015. New Zealand's UFO files are a bit creepy. I was in the library and stumbled across the bound files. There's a lot of assumed crazy people being crazy, but there's also one specific one that stood out from respectable Air Force pilots who were both in the air, conducted many tests, for instance blinking, moving the plane in relation to the object, verifying what he saw with the co-pilot to ensure it wasn't an illusion or his mind. I don't know, just the fact that you'd assume he wasn't crazy creeps me out so much. The contents of the Hanford site. Huge rusty tanks filled with chemical and radioactive waste of unknown composition in some cases. I worked on a project to build a robotic system to enter one tank and drill through the crust at the top to take samples of what was inside. The chemical environment was considered uncertain. Possible biological and aerobic bacteria, radioactive, etc. https://n.mwikipedia.org/wiki/hanford_site. The end. Thanks for watching.